The darkness of space held no mysteries for Admiral Krixthal anymore. He had seen it all. Black holes that could swallow entire star systems, nebulae that stretched across light years of empty void, planets made of pure diamond, suns that burned cold and blue. None of it impressed him now. Standing 12 feet tall in his command chamber, Krixthal looked out at the stars through the massive viewing port of his ship. His obsidian-black skin caught the light from distant suns and threw it back like polished metal. Forearms moved with practiced ease as he reviewed reports from across the galaxy. His mandibles clicked together in a rhythm that his crew had learned. Meant he was thinking. The Devourer of Worlds was the largest ship in the 47th Conquest Fleet. It stretched for over 3 miles from bow to stern. Its hull was covered in spikes and weapons that could turn entire moons into dust. The ship looked like something from a nightmare, which was exactly what the Zephyrians wanted. Fear was their greatest weapon, and they used it well. Behind Krixthal, his bridge crew worked in silence. They knew better than to interrupt their admiral when he was in this mood. Each crew member stood over 8 feet tall and moved with the fluid grace of born killers. Their black exoskeletons gleamed under the ship's red lighting. Sharp claws clicked against control panels as they monitored the ship's systems. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. In all that time, no species had ever successfully resisted them. Some tried to fight. Others tried to hide. A few attempted to negotiate. All of them failed. The Zephyrians were simply too strong, too fast, and too smart. They were evolution's perfect predators. Krixthal remembered his first conquest. He had been young then, barely 200 years old. The target had been a peaceful species called the Mellery. They lived on garden worlds and spent their time creating art and music. When the Zephyrian fleet arrived, the Melari sent messages of welcome. They thought the massive black ships were explorers like themselves. The war, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 6 hours. The Melari had no weapons worth mentioning. Their ships were designed for exploration, not combat. They died without understanding why. Krixthal still remembered the sound of their final transmissions, confused voices asking what they had done wrong. That was 47 worlds ago. 47 different species, all extinct now. Some had fought harder than the Melari. The Cortan had massive armies and weapons that could crack continents. The Thexian collective had tried to upload their consciousness into machines to escape death. The Void Swimmers had attempted to flee into the space between galaxies. None of it mattered. The Zephyrians always won. They were bigger, stronger, and more ruthless than anything the galaxy had produced. They felt no mercy, no doubt, and most importantly, no fear. Fear was something that happened to other species, not to them. A soft chime drew Krixthal's attention back to the present. His tactical officer, Commander Zekvar, approached with careful steps. Even among Zephyrians, Krixthal was known for his temper. Smart crew members learned to move slowly around him. "Admiral," Zekvar said, his voice a low rumble, "long-range sensors have detected a new species in the Outer Rim territories." Krixthal turned his massive head toward his subordinate. 4 yellow eyes focused on the smaller Zephyrian with interest. "Tell me about them." Zekvar activated a holographic display between them. A small blue and green world appeared, spinning slowly in the air. They call themselves humans. Their homeworld is designated as Earth in their language, 3rd planet from a yellow star in what they call the Sol system. The image zoomed in to show continents and oceans. Cities of light dotted the surface like scattered gems. Krixthal could see the obvious signs of an industrial civilization. Straight lines that had to be roads. Geometric shapes that were clearly buildings. The bright spots that meant large population centers. "How many ships do they possess?" Krixthal asked. "Approximately 2,000 vessels, Admiral. Most appear to be cargo haulers and short-range patrol craft. Their technology level is quite primitive. They still use chemical rockets for basic propulsion." Krixthal's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. Chemical rockets? How primitive are we talking? They only achieved interplanetary flight within the last century. They have small colonies on nearby worlds, but nothing substantial. Their largest warships are barely 500 meters long. Most are much smaller. The Admiral walked closer to the hologram. He could see tiny specks moving between the planets. Human ships going about their daily business with no idea what was coming for them. It was almost sad how small and fragile they looked. "What about their military capabilities?" he asked. "Limited, sir. They have kinetic weapons, chemical explosives, and some basic energy weapons. Nothing that could threaten even our smallest escort vessels. Our intelligence suggests they still fight wars among themselves using primitive projectile weapons. They fight each other? Crixthal found this interesting. Most species achieved peace among their own kind before reaching space. Internal conflict usually meant they were still very primitive. Yes, Admiral. They appear to be divided into numerous competing nations. Our analysis suggests they have only recently begun working together on space exploration. Their level of cooperation is minimal at best. Crixthal nodded slowly. This was even better than he had hoped. A divided species would be easier to conquer. They would probably surrender quickly once they understood what they faced. Some might even offer to help hunt down their own kind in exchange for their lives. Estimated population? He asked. 8 billion individuals on the homeworld. Perhaps another million scattered across their small colonies. 8 billion. Crixthal repeated the number with satisfaction. It would be a substantial addition to the Empire's slave population. Those who survived the conquest would serve as workers in the Zephyrian industrial complexes. The strong ones might even be allowed to live long enough to have children. Shall I prepare the standard intimidation broadcast, Admiral? Sekvar asked. Yes. Give them the usual choice. Slavery or extinction. Make sure they understand the consequences of resistance. Sekvar bowed his head in acknowledgement. What time limit shall I give them? 72 of their planetary rotations. That should be enough time for them to panic properly and make the right decision. As Sekvar moved away to prepare the transmission, Crixthal returned his attention to the hologram. The little blue world continued to spin peacefully, unaware that its fate had just been decided. Soon those bright city lights would be extinguished forever. The geometric patterns would be replaced by the angular architecture of Zephyrian occupation. He had seen it happen 47 times before. First came the disbelief, then the desperate attempts at negotiation. Finally, the futile military resistance that always ended the same way. Some species lasted longer than others, but they all fell eventually. These humans would be no different. They were weak, divided, and technologically inferior. The conquest would probably be completed within a standard month. After that, Crixthal could add another notch to his record and move on to the next target. The Admiral allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the tiny human ships moving through, their system like insects around a light. Soon they would learn what it meant to face the Zephyrian Empire. They would discover that some nightmares were real, and that the darkness between stars held monsters they had never imagined. It would be just another routine conquest in a career filled with them. Nothing about these humans suggested they would be any different from all the others who had fallen before the Empire's might. Captain Jake Morrison was having his morning coffee when the universe changed forever. He stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the stars through the main viewing screen. The Liberty was one of humanity's newest exploration ships, built to push the boundaries of known space and search for new worlds to colonize. Jake had been in space for 15 years. Ever since he graduated from the Space Academy, he had seen gas giants with rings of pure ice, asteroids made of solid platinum, and nebulae that painted space in colors that had no names. But he had never seen anything like what appeared on his communication screen that morning. "Captain," called Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from her station. "I'm getting something strange on the long-range array. It's definitely artificial, but the signal pattern is unlike anything in our databases." Jake set down his coffee mug and walked over to her console. Amy was the best communications officer in the fleet, and if she said something was strange, it was worth investigating. The screen showed a complex pattern of electromagnetic pulses that clearly carried information. "Any idea what language it might be?" Jake asked. "The computer is working on it now, sir. The pattern suggests it's some kind of mathematical code. Very sophisticated. Whoever sent this is definitely not human." A chill ran down Jake's spine. Humanity had been searching for signs of alien life for over a century. They had found plenty of dead worlds and some basic microorganisms, but never anything intelligent. The possibility that they were finally making contact with another species was both exciting and terrifying. "How long until we have a translation?" he asked. "The AI estimates another 20 minutes, Captain. The language structure is completely different from anything we've encountered, but there are clear mathematical references that should help crack the code." Jake nodded and activated the ship's intercom. "All senior staff to the bridge immediately. We may be about to make history." Within minutes, the bridge filled with the Liberty's key officers. Commander Rick Thompson, the first officer, arrived first. He was followed by Dr. Lisa Chang, the chief science officer, and Major Paul Davis, the head of security. Each of them looked curious but concerned. "What's the situation, Captain?" Rick asked. "We've received what appears to be an alien transmission. Amy's working on translating it now." Dr. Chang's eyes lit up with excitement. "This is incredible. Do we know where it came from?" "Long-range sensors suggest it originated from outside our solar system," Amy reported. "The signal strength indicates it was broadcast with considerable power. Whoever sent this wanted to make sure it was received." Major Davis frowned. "Captain, should we consider the possibility that this might be some kind of threat? If an alien species has the technology to send signals across interstellar space, they might be far more advanced than us." Before Jake could respond, Amy's console chimed. "Translation complete, Captain. The AI has managed to decode the message using mathematical constants and basic physics as reference points. Put it on the main screen," Jake ordered. The bridge fell silent as text appeared on the viewing screen. The words were rendered in simple English, but their meaning hit the crew like a physical blow. "Attention, primitive species of the third planet. You have been discovered by the Zephyrian Empire. Your world and your people now belong to us. You will surrender immediately and accept your new status as subjects of the Empire. Resistance will result in the complete annihilation of your species. You have 72 of your planetary rotations to comply with this demand. Prepare for the arrival of our forces." Nobody spoke for a long moment. The implications of the message were too enormous to process quickly. Humanity was not alone in the universe, but their first contact with alien life was a demand for surrender. Dr. Chang was the first to break the silence. "This has to be some kind of mistake. No species would simply demand the surrender of an entire civilization without even attempting peaceful contact. Unless they've done it before," Major Davis said grimly. "This message reads like a standard form. Like they've sent the same demand to other species." Rick looked at Jake with concern. "Captain, we need to contact Earth immediately." "This is way above our authority level." Jake nodded, but something about the alien message bothered him. The tone was so casual, so matter-of-fact. These Zephyrians seemed to think that humanity would simply roll over and accept slavery without a fight. They clearly had no idea what kind of species they were dealing with. "Amy, open a channel to Earth Command. Priority Alpha encryption. Tell them we need to speak with Admiral Campbell immediately." While Amy worked to establish the connection, Jake studied the alien message again. 72 hours to surrender an entire world. The arrogance was breathtaking. These aliens seemed to think that humanity would be so terrified by their demands that resistance wouldn't even be considered. The main screen shifted to show Admiral Lisa Campbell sitting behind her desk at Earth Defense Command. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen more combat than most people could imagine. She had fought in 3 different wars and earned every medal the military could give. "Captain Morrison," she said, "I understand you have something urgent to report." "Admiral, we've received what appears to be a surrender demand from an alien species calling themselves the Zephyrian Empire. They're giving us 72 hours to accept slavery or face extinction." Admiral Campbell's expression didn't change, but Jake could see her jaw tighten slightly. "Send me the full message immediately. I'll need to brief the President and the Defense Council." "Yes, ma'am." "Admiral, what are your initial thoughts?" Campbell was quiet for a moment, reading the alien transmission on her own screen. When she looked back at Jake, her eyes were hard as steel. "My initial thought, Captain, is that these aliens have made a serious mistake. They seem to think we're some kind of primitive species that will panic at the first sign of a threat. What should we tell them, Admiral?" "Nothing yet. Let them wait. I want our best scientists to analyze this transmission and figure out what we're dealing with. In the meantime, I'll be speaking with world leaders about our response." The connection ended, leaving the bridge crew alone with their thoughts. Jake looked around at his officers and saw the same mix of fear and anger on every face. The fear was understandable. Humanity was apparently facing a threat unlike anything they had ever encountered. But the anger was purely human. Nobody threatened Earth and expected humans to simply accept it. "Captain," Amy said quietly, "there's something else. The transmission included coordinates. I think they're telling us where their fleet is coming from." Jake studied the data on her screen. The coordinates pointed to a location about 50 light-years away. If these aliens had faster-than-light travel, they could reach Earth in days or weeks rather than decades. "Amy, I want you to compose a response to their message." "Sir, what should I tell them?" Jake thought about Admiral Campbell's words. These aliens expected humanity to panic and surrender without a fight. They had clearly never encountered a species like humans before. Maybe it was time to educate them. Tell them that humanity respectfully declines their generous offer. Rick stared at him in shock. Captain, are you sure that's wise? We don't know what kind of technology they have. Jake smiled grimly. Add this to the message, Amy. Tell them that if they want our world, they're welcome to come and try to take it. As Amy's fingers moved over her console, Jake felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. Humanity had always been at its best when facing impossible odds. They had survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and the hostile environment of space itself. Now they faced their greatest challenge yet. The aliens thought they were dealing with a primitive species that would collapse at the first sign of real opposition. They were about to learn that humans had never been very good at knowing when to quit. Captain Vextar had destroyed 18 worlds in his career. The Zephyrian destroyer Bone Crusher was his personal weapon, a ship designed for one purpose: to bring fear to the enemies of the Empire. At 800 meters long and bristling with weapons, it was more than capable of wiping out entire fleets of primitive vessels. Today's mission was simple: destroy the human mining colony on the fourth planet of their system. Make sure the destruction was recorded and broadcast to their homeworld. Show these creatures what happened to species that dared to refuse the Empire's generous offer of slavery. Vextar stood in his command center, watching the red planet grow larger on the viewing screen. Mars, the humans called it, a dead world that they had somehow managed to turn into a working colony. Intelligence reports suggested they were mining iron ore and rare metals from the planet's surface. Status report, Vextar commanded. We are approaching the target planet. Captain, his tactical officer replied. Sensors detect approximately 50,000 human colonists on the surface. Their defenses consist of a few orbital platforms with primitive missile systems. Vextar's mandibles clicked in amusement. 50,000 lives would be snuffed out in minutes. The orbital platforms wouldn't even slow them down. Their missiles would bounce off the Bone Crusher's shields like thrown rocks. Any sign of their military vessels? He asked. Long-range sensors show several cargo ships fleeing the system, Captain. Nothing that appears to be armed. Cowards, Vextar muttered. This was always the same pattern. The moment a Zephyrian ship appeared, every other vessel in the area would run as fast as their engines could carry them. Fear was truly the Empire's greatest weapon. The Bone Crusher moved into orbit around Mars. Below them, the human colony sprawled across a series of interconnected domes and underground tunnels. It was actually quite impressive for such a primitive species. They had managed to create a working atmosphere inside their structures and establish what appeared to be a thriving community. Begin recording, Vextar ordered. I want every moment of this destruction sent to Earth. Let them see what happens to those who defy the Empire. Recording active. Captain. Vextar was about to give the order to fire when his sensor operator called out urgently. Captain, we have a new contact. Small vessel approaching from the direction of the asteroid belt. On the main screen, a tiny speck of light grew slowly larger. As it came closer, Vextar could see it was a human ship. Much smaller than his destroyer, maybe 100 meters long. It looked like some kind of patrol vessel or light cruiser. Are they trying to escape? Vextar asked. Negative, Captain. The vessel is on an intercept course. It's heading straight for us. Vextar stared at the screen in confusion. A single small ship was approaching a Zephyrian destroyer. Either the humans were even more primitive than he thought, or they had seriously misunderstood the situation. Open a communication channel, he ordered. The main screen shifted to show the bridge of the human vessel. A man in a blue uniform sat in the captain's chair. He appeared calm, almost relaxed. His name tag read Captain S. Parker, and he looked like he was in his 40s. Gray hair, weathered face, and eyes that showed no trace of fear. Unknown vessel, the human said. You are ordered to leave this system immediately or face the consequences. Vextar laughed, a sound like grinding metal. The bridge crew joined in, their own laughter echoing through the command center. This had to be some kind of joke. A tiny human ship threatening a Zephyrian destroyer? Foolish creature, Vextar replied. Your ship is insignificant compared to our might. We could destroy you with a single weapon burst. The human captain leaned back in his chair and smiled. Maybe so, friend. But let me tell you something about humans. We don't back down from bullies. Then you will die for your stupidity, Vextar snarled. All weapons target the human vessel. Prepare to fire. But before he could give the order to attack, something unexpected happened. The human ship opened fire first. Tiny projectiles streaked across space and struck the Bone Crusher's shields. The impact barely registered on their defensive systems. It was like being hit by raindrops. "Their weapons cannot penetrate our shields, Captain," the tactical officer reported. "Shall I return fire?" Vextar was about to say yes when he noticed something strange. The human ship was not trying to retreat. Instead, it was accelerating toward them, getting closer and closer to the destroyer. "What are they doing?" he muttered. On the communication screen, Captain Parker was speaking to his own crew. "All hands, this is the captain. Today we show these alien bastards that humanity doesn't kneel to anyone. It's been an honor serving with you all." The human ship was now very close to the Bone Crusher. Too close. Vextar suddenly realized what was happening, but it was too late to stop it. "Evasive maneuvers," he shouted. "Get us away from that ship!" But the Bone Crusher was too large and slow to avoid the much smaller human vessel. Captain Parker's ship, the UES Defiant, slammed into the destroyer's hull at maximum velocity. The impact created a massive explosion that tore through both vessels. The Defiant was vaporized instantly, but its sacrifice was not in vain. The explosion ripped a huge hole in the Bone Crusher's side, exposing several decks to space. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the ship as atmosphere rushed out through the breach. "Damage report," Vextar demanded, struggling to stay on his feet as the ship shook around him. "Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, Captain. We've lost life support to those sections. The main reactor is offline. We're running on emergency power only." Vextar stared at the main screen in shock. The human ship was gone, completely destroyed. But somehow in dying it had crippled his destroyer. In 3,000 years of Zephyrian history, no enemy vessel had ever successfully damaged one of their ships. "Can we make repairs?" he asked. "Not here, Captain. We need to return to base immediately for full repairs. The ship is no longer combat capable." For the first time in his career, Vextar felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of death, but fear of having to explain this disaster to his superiors. How could he tell them that a primitive human vessel had damaged a Zephyrian destroyer? "Set course for the nearest Imperial base," he ordered quietly. "Maximum speed." As the crippled Bone Crusher limped away from Mars, Vextar tried to make sense of what had happened. The human captain had sacrificed his ship and crew to damage an enemy he couldn't possibly defeat. It was completely illogical. No rational species would throw away lives so carelessly. But as he reviewed the recording of the battle, Vextar began to understand something disturbing. The human captain hadn't looked afraid when he made his final attack. He had looked angry, determined, and strangely satisfied, like he knew he was going to die but was happy to take some enemies with him. The recording would have to be sent to Imperial Command, of course. They needed to know that their standard intimidation tactics had failed, but Vextar dreaded the questions that would follow. How had a primitive species managed to damage a Zephyrian warship? What kind of creatures would sacrifice their own lives just to hurt their enemies? Most disturbing of all, what would happen when the Empire sent a full fleet to deal with these humans? If one small ship could cause this much damage, what could thousands of them do? For the first time in 3 millennia, a Zephyrian captain found himself hoping that his enemies would see reason and surrender. Because if this was how humans fought when they were outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1, he didn't want to imagine what they would do when they were truly cornered. The recording of Captain Parker's sacrifice spread through both the human colonies and the Zephyrian Empire like wildfire. But each species drew very different conclusions from what they saw. The humans saw a hero who proved that even the mighty Empire could bleed. The Zephyrians saw something that should have been impossible, a species that fought harder when the odds were hopeless. Neither side fully understood yet that this single moment had changed everything. The age of easy Zephyrian conquest was over. The humans had awakened something in themselves that would not be easily crushed. And the Empire, for the first time in its history, had learned what it felt like to be afraid. The news of Captain Parker's sacrifice reached Earth exactly 18 hours after the Bone Crusher limped away from Mars. Admiral Lisa Campbell sat in the emergency session of the United Earth Council, watching the recording for the 5th time. Around the table, representatives from every nation on Earth stared at the screen with a mixture of horror and pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Campbell said as the recording ended, "we now know exactly what we're dealing with. These Zephyrians expected us to panic and surrender at the first show of force. Captain Parker proved them wrong. President Martinez of the Americas leaned forward in his chair. Admiral, what are our realistic chances against an empire that has ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years? Campbell stood up and activated a holographic display showing the solar system. Red dots marked known Zephyrian positions while blue dots showed human colonies and ships. The difference in numbers was staggering. Honestly, Mr. President, if we fight them the way they expect us to fight, we have no chance at all. Their technology is superior, their ships are bigger, and they have resources from across the galaxy. In a straight military confrontation, they would crush us in weeks. Then what do you suggest? Asked Prime Minister Chen from the Asian Coalition. Campbell smiled grimly. We don't fight them the way they expect. These aliens have spent 3,000 years conquering species that fought like civilized beings. They're used to enemies who follow military protocols, who retreat when outnumbered, who surrender when defeat seems certain. She paused and looked around the table at the world leaders. But humans have never been very good at following the rules. We've survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and the vacuum of space itself. Not because we're the strongest or the smartest, but because we refuse to give up. Chancellor Weber from the European Federation frowned. What exactly are you proposing, Admiral? Total war, Campbell replied. Not just military vessels, but every ship, every station, every human in space becomes part of the war effort. We turn our cargo haulers into missile platforms. We convert our mining ships into bombers. We use our industrial stations as weapons factories. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. What Campbell was describing wasn't a military campaign. It was the transformation of their entire civilization into a weapon. The economic cost would be enormous, warned Secretary Williams from the African Union. Converting civilian infrastructure for military use would devastate our trade networks. Like the cost of losing will be much higher, Campbell replied. These aliens don't take prisoners for long. They use conquered species as slave labor until they're no longer useful. Then they eliminate them. This isn't about money or territory anymore. This is about survival. President Martinez nodded slowly. What do you need from us, Admiral? Everything, Campbell said simply. I need every government to declare a state of emergency. I need all space-based industry converted to military production. I need every person with space experience to volunteer for the defense forces. And I need the authority to use any tactics necessary to protect humanity. Over the next 48 hours, something unprecedented happened on Earth. For the first time in human history, every nation on the planet united behind a single cause. The old conflicts and rivalries were set aside, as humanity faced an external threat that made their previous wars seem like playground arguments. In orbit around Earth, the massive Harmony Station was transformed overnight. The peaceful research facility became a weapons factory, its laboratories retooled to produce military equipment. Scientists who had spent their careers studying stellar formation now worked on designing more efficient explosives. On Luna, the mining colonies stopped extracting materials for civilian use and focused entirely on military production. The low-gravity environment that had once been used for delicate manufacturing now produced armor plating and missile components. Even the tourist facilities were converted into training centers for new recruits. Throughout the asteroid belt, miners abandoned their regular routes and began harvesting specific materials needed for the war effort. Ships that had spent decades moving slowly between rocks now raced against time to gather resources for Earth's defense. But the most dramatic changes happened to the ships themselves. The passenger liner Star of Mumbai had its luxury compartment stripped out and replaced with missile launchers. The cargo hauler Deep Space Express was packed with explosives and turned into a massive guided bomb. Even small private yachts were fitted with whatever weapons could be squeezed into their hulls. Captain Danny Martinez commanded one of those converted vessels. His ship had once been a simple cargo runner called the Free Spirit. Now it bristled with improvised weapons and armor plating. The modifications looked crude compared to purpose-built warships, but they worked. "Danny, this is insane," his co-pilot Kate Johnson said as they reviewed their new mission parameters. "We're supposed to attack alien warships with a converted cargo hauler?" Danny shrugged. "Kate, my grandfather fought in World War III with equipment that was held together with tape and prayers. He always said that the best weapon wasn't the fanciest one. It was the one you actually had when you needed it. Across human space, Similar conversations were happening on hundreds of ships. Professional soldiers worked alongside civilian volunteers, teaching them basic combat tactics. Engineers who had never seen a weapon bigger than a screwdriver learned how to operate missile systems. Doctors and nurses prepared for casualties on a scale they had never imagined. Meanwhile, in the deep reaches of space, Admiral Krixthal was dealing with a crisis of his own. The recording from Captain Vextar's encounter with the humans had reached the Zephyrian High Command, and their reaction was not what he had expected. "This is unacceptable," hissed High Counselor Mordak through the communication link. "A single primitive vessel damaged one of our destroyers? How is this possible?" Krixthal had been dreading this conversation. "The humans used suicide tactics, Counselor. They rammed our ship with their own vessel, destroying both." "Suicide tactics?" Mordak's voice carried a note of confusion. "What species uses suicide tactics against a superior enemy? It gains them nothing. That's what concerns me, Counselor. These humans don't seem to think logically about warfare. They attack when they should retreat. They fight when they should surrender. They sacrifice themselves for no strategic gain." There was a long pause before Mordak replied. "Perhaps they are simply too primitive to understand the futility of resistance. Send a larger force to complete the conquest. The 12th Battle Group should be sufficient. Counselor, I recommend extreme caution. These humans are not like other species we have encountered. Admiral," Mordak interrupted. "Are you telling me that the mighty Zephyrian Empire should fear a handful of primitive creatures who have barely left their home system?" Krixthal wanted to say yes, that was exactly what he was telling them. But no Zephyrian had ever admitted to fear, and he wasn't about to be the first. "Of course not, Counselor. I will prepare the 12th Battle Group for immediate deployment." As the communication ended, Krixthal stared out at the stars and tried to understand what was happening. In 3,000 years of conquest, the pattern had always been the same. The Empire would arrive, demand surrender, and the target species would either submit immediately or fight a brief, hopeless campaign before accepting defeat. But these humans had done something no other species had ever attempted. They had hurt a Zephyrian ship. More than that, they had done it through pure determination rather than superior technology. The human captain had known he was going to die, but he had attacked anyway. What kind of species fought that way? What kind of creatures would rather die than submit? And most importantly, what would happen when the Empire sent 500 ships to face an enemy that had already proven they were willing to die for their freedom? For the first time in his long career, Admiral Krixthal found himself hoping that the humans would see reason and surrender before the real fighting began. Because if they fought the way Captain Parker had fought, the coming war would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Back on Earth, Admiral Campbell finished reviewing the deployment orders for the human defense fleet. It wasn't much compared to what was coming their way, but it would have to be enough. As she prepared to leave for her command ship, she paused to look out at the blue and white world that had given birth to humanity. "Come and take it," she whispered, echoing Captain Morrison's defiant message to the aliens. "Come and take it if you can." 2 years had passed since the first Zephyrian ship entered human space. 2 years of the most brutal warfare the galaxy had ever witnessed. Admiral Krixthal stood in his command center aboard the Devourer of Worlds, staring at casualty reports that made no sense to him. The numbers were impossible. The Zephyrian Empire had lost over 800 ships in the past 24 months. 800 vessels destroyed by a species that had barely managed to leave their home system when the war began. It defied every military principle he had learned in his 4 centuries of service. "Admiral," his aide Commander Zekvar approached carefully, "the High Council is requesting another status report." Krixthal's mandibles clicked with frustration. Another report. Another attempt to explain the impossible to leaders who had never seen real combat. The High Council sat in their crystal palaces on the homeworld, making decisions about a war they didn't understand. "Tell them the same thing I told them last month," he said. "The humans refused to surrender. They refused to retreat. They refused to follow any rational military doctrine. Sir, they're specifically asking about the incident at Proxima Station." Krixthal winced. Proxima Station had been their latest disaster. The Empire had sent a full battle group to capture the human mining facility. 50 Zephyrian ships against a single space station that should have fallen in minutes. Instead, the humans had turned the station itself into a weapon. They loaded it with explosives and rammed it into the Zephyrian flagship. The explosion had destroyed not just the station but 12 Imperial vessels. The survivors had fled in panic, something that would have been unthinkable 3 years ago. The humans sacrificed an entire station and 3,000 lives just to damage our fleet. Crixthal said quietly, "What kind of species does that?" Across the galaxy, Commander Ben Hayes was asking himself a similar question as he prepared for another suicide mission. His small flotilla of converted cargo ships hung in space near the Jupiter system, waiting for the Zephyrian supply convoy that intelligence said was coming. Ben's force consisted of 8 ships, all civilian vessels that had been hastily armed with whatever weapons Earth's factories could produce. They were going up against 30 Zephyrian supply ships and their escort of 15 destroyers. The odds were 5-1 against them, but Ben had stopped worrying about odds a long time ago. "All ships, this is Commander Hayes." He spoke into his communication system. "Today we send another message to these alien bastards. We show them that humanity doesn't back down, no matter what they throw at us." The response came back from 8 different ships, 8 different crews who knew they were probably going to die in the next hour, but their voices were steady, determined. They had all volunteered for this mission, just like thousands of other humans had volunteered for similar missions over the past 2 years. "Copy that. Commander," came the voice of Captain Sarah Williams from the converted freighter New Hope. "Let's show them what happens when you threaten Earth." Ben smiled grimly. Sarah had lost her husband in the first Zephyrian attack on the lunar colonies. Her 2 sons were serving in the defense fleet around Mars. She had every reason to hate the aliens, and she channeled that hate into deadly efficiency. The Zephyrian convoy dropped out of hyperspace exactly where intelligence had predicted. 30 massive supply ships, each one carrying enough weapons and ammunition to outfit an entire battle group. The escort destroyers spread out in a protective formation, their sensors scanning for threats. "Unknown vessels," came the transmission from the lead Zephyrian destroyer. "You are ordered to withdraw immediately or be destroyed." Ben opened a response channel. "This is Commander Hayes of the Earth Defense Force. You're the ones who need to withdraw. This is human space now." He could hear the alien captain's laughter through the communication link, harsh mechanical sounds that showed no trace of fear or concern. These Zephyrians still thought they were dealing with a primitive species that could be intimidated. "Human," the alien voice replied. "You have 8 small ships against our 45 vessels. Surrender now and we will make your deaths quick." "Thanks for the offer," Ben said, "but we'll pass." The human ships attacked without warning, diving in among the supply vessels like wolves attacking a herd of sheep. Their weapons were crude compared to Zephyrian technology, but they were used with a ferocity that the aliens had never encountered. The New Hope rammed directly into a supply ship 3 times its size, the explosion taking out both vessels instantly. The converted mining ship Deep Strike used its industrial cutting lasers to slice through a destroyer's hull before being vaporized by return fire. One by one, the human ships died, but each death came with a price. Ben's own ship, the Earth's Fury, was the last one left. His hull was breached in 6 places, life support was failing, and half his crew was dead, but he still had engines, and he still had 1 massive cargo hold packed with high explosives. "All remaining crew to escape pods," he ordered. "I'm taking this ship in for a final run." "Sir," his communications officer replied, "the escape pods were destroyed in the last attack. We're all staying with you." Ben felt a moment of pride in his species. Even facing certain death, his crew refused to abandon their mission. He aimed his ship at the largest supply vessel in the convoy and pushed his engines to maximum power. The explosion when Earth's Fury struck its target was visible from 3 star systems away. The supply ship's ammunition stores detonated in a chain reaction that destroyed 6 more vessels and crippled 4 others. Of the original 45-ship convoy, only 23 limped away from the battle. News of the victory spread through human space within hours. Another impossible triumph against overwhelming odds. Another proof that the Zephyrian Empire could be hurt, could be beaten, could be made to bleed. But the cost was becoming harder to bear. Earth had lost over 2 million people in the war so far. Entire colonies had been evacuated or destroyed. The once thriving trade networks between human worlds had collapsed as every available ship was pressed into military service. Admiral Campbell stood in her command center on the battle station Fortress Earth, looking at the latest casualty reports. The numbers were staggering, but they told only part of the story. For every human ship lost, the Zephyrians were losing 2 or 3 of their own. The exchange rate was unsustainable for both sides, but humanity seemed more willing to accept the cost. "Admiral," her aide reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian fleet. They're requesting a meeting to discuss terms." Campbell raised an eyebrow. In 2 years of warfare, the aliens had never asked for negotiations. They had demanded surrender, threatened extinction, and promised slavery, but they had never simply asked to talk. "Put them through," she said. The main screen showed Admiral Crixthal in his command center. The massive alien looked tired, his obsidian skin scarred from recent battles. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there when the war began. "Admiral Campbell," he said, "I am empowered by the High Council to offer terms for the cessation of hostilities." "I'm listening," Campbell replied carefully. "The Empire is prepared to recognize human sovereignty over your current territories. In exchange, humanity will agree not to expand beyond your present borders." Campbell stared at the alien admiral in amazement. 2 years ago, these creatures had demanded the complete surrender of the human race. Now they were offering to recognize human independence. "You're serious?" she asked. Crixthal's mandibles clicked slowly. "Admiral, in 3,000 years of conquest, the Empire has never encountered a species like yours. You fight with a determination that defies logic. You sacrifice everything for marginal gains. You turn every defeat into a rallying cry for further resistance." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You have taught the Zephyrian Empire something we had never learned before. You have taught us fear." Campbell leaned back in her chair, processing what she had just heard. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, were asking for peace because they were afraid of humanity. "I'll need to discuss this with Earth's government," she said finally. "Of course. But Admiral, I hope you will consider our offer carefully. This war has shown both our species what we are capable of. Perhaps it is time to choose a different path." As the transmission ended, Campbell looked out at the stars and thought about the past 2 years. Humanity had paid a terrible price for their freedom, but they had proven something important. They had shown that even the mightiest empire in the galaxy could be brought to the negotiating table by sheer determination and refusal to surrender. The war was far from over, but for the first time since it began, there was hope that it might end with humanity still free. They had survived their first contact with an alien species, and more importantly, they had shown the galaxy that Earth's children would never kneel to anyone. The universe had learned that humans were not just another primitive species to be conquered and enslaved. They were something new, something dangerous, something that would fight until the last star burned cold rather than accept defeat. And in the cold vastness of space, that made all the difference.